is at first light. From the low rise above Rhunahaorine, the land fell away toward the sea in a quilt of rough pasture, scrub, and pale, reed-flecked bog. To the east, the spine of Kintyre climbed in dark ridges. To the west, beyond a thin line of dune and machair, the Atlantic rolled in, grey and cold. It was there, between hill and shore, that the last Royalist army of Kintyre came apart. Spring 1647. The trap sets itself 4 weeks before that morning. Alastair McAllister had been slipping south through Argyll with what was left of his Irish and Highland host, perhaps 1,000, perhaps a little more. The great Montrose campaigns were over. Philip IV had broken the central Royalist army. The war had shrunk to pockets and peninsulas. Kintyre felt, for a time, like a place you could hold. To the north, the Tarbert Isthmus, a narrow neck of land between West Loch Tarbert and Loch Fyne, was easy to block with a few hundred men, some earthworks, and a couple of guns. To the west and south lay friendly or at least sympathetic ground, McDonnell lands at Largy, McDougall support, McAllister tenants and cousins. The seas around were still thick with Islay and Antrim galleys, links back to Ireland and the Isles. McAllister believed he had time. Time to rest his men, time to harry the Campbells, maybe even time to rebuild something of the old Isles League while Edinburgh and London tore at each other. What he did not reckon on was Sir David Leslie's speed. Leslie had cut his teeth in the 30 Years' War. Where many Scottish commanders thought in days and glens, he thought in forced marches and flanking routes. With Archibald Campbell, Marquis of Argyll, urging him on, he brought a Covenanter army down through the west with a pace that outstripped rumour. By 21-23 May, they had slipped past Tarbert, skirting or smashing McAllister's thin screen there. A move that, on a map, looks like a simple arrow meant, on the ground, that the Royalists who thought their back was to a narrow gate discovered that their enemy was suddenly behind that gate. Night of the 23rd of May, Largy Castle. On the eve of the battle, McAllister slept or tried to under the roof of Largy Castle, the MacDonald's strong house above the little bay of Tainlone. The hall smelled of peat and wet wool and salt brought in on cloaks. Outside, the last of his men lay in barns and byres, under carts and makeshift shelters. Many had not eaten properly in days. Inside, by the dying fire, Alastair bent over a rough map scratched into the table with a knife point. Tarbert marked with a circle and a few lines for ditches. A smear down the peninsula for the Royalist line of march. A question mark where rumour put Leslie still, he hoped, well to the north. Tarbert holds, one of his captains said. Or it should. They'd need to sprout wings to be here by tomorrow. Alastair didn't answer. The campaign had given him little reason to trust Shud anymore. He turned instead to the local men. What lies between here and the sea? He asked a MacDonald of Largy, jabbing toward the west. Low ground, the man said. Rhunahaorine moss and rush. Good for grazing in summer, bad in wet weather. There's firmer strips if you ken them, but a heavy horse will bob there if he's not careful. McAllister grunted. All right. We move at first light. If Leslie comes, he'll come with horse first. Better to take the shock in open ground than be caught at the castle like rats. They broke up late, each man peeling off to find a corner of floor or a pile of cloaks. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters, carrying faintly the crash of the Atlantic on the western shore. Somewhere in the dark, a Kintyre woman whispered a prayer in Gaelic for the men whose boots were in her yard. She thought of old raids, of times when those men or their fathers had come by sea to take cattle and go again. Now they came on weary feet, and someone else's iron horse was behind them. Dawn, the 24th of May. Leslie's vanguard very early, before the light had fully bled into the sky. Sir David Leslie sent his advance troop of cavalry forward. 40, maybe 60 horsemen. Enough to see, to feel, to jab. Not enough, if things went badly, to lose the war on a single rash move, but enough, if things went well, to herd a broken enemy into a killing ground. The riders moved down the rough track toward Rhunahaorine in small knots, cloaks pulled tight, breath steaming in the cool air. Their horses snorted at the smell of salt and bog. Leslie rode a little behind them with his staff, infantry columns trudging further in the rear, their pikes and musket barrels catching what little light there was. He had reports. McAllister's main body was near Largy, stretched and disordered. Tarbert's defense had been too thin to slow a determined cavalry thrust. The local McDonalds and McDougalls were bringing in men, but these were not trained troops, more a crowd than a line. He also had his orders, whether written or only very strongly implied. Finish this. Break the Kintyre resistance so thoroughly that it cannot rise again. The first sight Rhunahaorine was the ground changed as the riders approached Rhunahaorine. The packed earth road frayed into wheel ruts and cattle tracks. The turf became springy, the grass giving way to patches of brown water, hummocks of heather and sedge. To the right, the land dipped toward a strip of sand and stones and thin, grey surf. To the left, it rose gently toward rough pasture and low hills. The vanguard's commander, a hard-faced captain who had seen charge and countercharge on bigger fields, reined in on a slightly higher patch and shaded his eyes. Shapes moved ahead. At first they were only dark flakes against the paler bog, then they resolved into men. Knots of infantry, some in tartan, some in plain homespun, muskets slung or carried, pikes on shoulders. A handful of horsemen, not many, 3 or 4 dozen at most, poorly matched mounts and tack but armed. No neat line, no flags aligned, more a column that had bled out sideways while marching. McAllister's lot, one trooper muttered. But something was off. The enemy looked unready, more like men surprised on the move than a formed battle line. The captain understood in a heartbeat. They'd caught the Royalists between positions, on half-solid ground, with no time to choose their patch or set their stakes. He glanced back. Leslie and the foot were still some distance behind, their presence a dark smear on the northern sky. He weighed the odds, 40 or 60 horse against several times that number of mixed infantry and light horse, and then decided. We go in, he said. If they stand, we pull back in good order. If they break, we keep them running. He drew his sword. The blades rasped out around him like one long breath. The moment before Royalist confusion on the Royalist side, McAllister's men were only just beginning to fan out when they saw the cavalry. Some had marched down from Largy at dawn, others had been camped in the hollow of the land overnight. Their boots were already damp, the moss sucked at them as they shifted. One of McAllister's lieutenants, a McDougall, tried to bark orders. Pikes to the front. Horse to the flank. Form on me, damn you. But the words met tired muscles and blurred minds. These were men who had marched through multiple campaigns, seen victory and slaughter, starved in Argyll glens and watched comrades fall at Philiphaugh. They had signed on for a cause that now seemed a handful of scattered banners and broken promises. McAllister himself, by most later accounts, was not yet in position. Whether he was up at Largy, conferring with his McDonnell hosts, or somewhere along the column, he was not there to crack skulls into formation. So when the Covenanter cavalry's line came into clear view, advancing at a trot that churned the moss into clods, the Royalists had no solid hedge of spears to meet them. What they had were clumps of men looking at one another, at the horsemen, at the uncertain ground, and feeling their stomachs knot. Some remembered stories of Leslie's cavalry at Philiphaugh. Others remembered the news talk in Kintyre, what the Covenanters did to Irish butchers and rebel lads when they caught them. Someone in the front rank fired his musket too soon. The ball went wide, the smoke drifted uselessly. The charge the Covenanter captain saw the ragged volley, the lack of real formation, the way some men were already stepping back, and he knew. Now, he shouted. The vanguard broke into a gallop. Hooves hammered. Mud flew. The horses plunged and scrambled, slipping on wet clods, splashing through shallow pools. Riders leaned forward, faces tight, pistols in one hand, swords in the other. For a heartbeat, the two lines moved toward each other across the bog, one fast, one slow and ragged. Then the front of McAllister's force buckled. A few pikes came down, wavered, and snapping when horses hit them. Some men fired muskets at 10, 15 paces, but many shots went wild as their owners flinched from the onrushing mass of iron and flesh. The first impact was messy. A horse crashed into the side of a half-formed group of McDougall men, bowling them over. Another stumbled in a deeper patch, its rider pitched forward to be dragged or trampled. A Covenanter trooper fired his pistol straight into a Highlander's chest, then swung his sword down on another man's shoulder as they passed. But the psychological effect was out of all proportion to the numbers. In a matter of seconds, The sound changed from shouts and orders to the high, tearing noise of panic. Horse! Horse! The rest of them will be on us. They've flanked us, run! Back! Back to Largy! Men began to turn, stepping on one another, stumbling in the moss. A few tried to make a stand, but when their neighbors bolted they found themselves suddenly alone, then knocked aside by their own sides' bodies. What had been a precarious line became a swirling mess of fleeing infantry, collapsing cavalry, and screaming wounded. The rout Leslie's horsemen did exactly what seasoned cavalry do when an enemy cracks. They rode into the gaps and kept them open. Some troopers cut at any man within reach, pike, musket, or sword in his hand. Others simply drove their mounts forward, using sheer weight and the terror of hooves and blades, to keep the enemy moving in the direction they wanted, south, away from Largy, away from any chance to reform. Here and there, a small knot of Royalists tried to stand. A half-dozen McDonalds from Largy around a tattered banner, knees almost to their waists in mud, pikes bristling overrun when a flanking group of horse splashed round their side and hit them from behind. A pair of Irish officers on better horses, pistols firing, managing to cut their way clear with a handful of followers before they were swallowed by the fleeing mass. In the worst patches of moss, men who slipped did not get up again. A Kintyre tacksman in soaked tartan, boots stuck, hands flailing as his comrades ran past, then the flash of hooves and a scream cut short. A boy from the glen, face barely whiskered, pulled down by the weight of his own musket and kit, sinking thigh deep into the cold, sucking mire as the fight rolled away from him. Behind the cavalry, Leslie's infantry came up, muskets ready, pikes lowered. By the time they reached the outer edge of the moss, the battle was already a rout. Later reports would count about 80 Royalists dead in the immediate charge and pursuit, with more scattered bodies found along the line of flight. For a fight that lasted perhaps an hour, it was enough. It wasn't the number that mattered, it was the breaking. McAllister's escape. McAllister's exact movements that morning are blurry in the sources. What they agree on is this: he did not die at Rhunahaorine. He did not stay to be taken at Dunavity. He left Kintyre by sea, first to Gear, then to Islay, and from there back to Ireland. You can imagine the moment. Somewhere between Largy and the moss, a rider catches him. They've hit us, McAllister, the man gasps. Cavalry, Leslie's vanguard. The men are running. There's no line, it's a rout. Another breathless voice adds. And behind them, the rest. I saw the dust, the pikes. A full army, not just horse. McAllister has seen too many battlefields to mistake a collapse for a setback. He knows what Leslie will do with prisoners like him. He also knows that if he is taken, it won't just be his own neck. His name is tied to every Irishman in that host. His marriage binds him to McAllister's of Loop, his kinship ties stretch to Islay, Antrim, the Glens. A dead McCulloch on a Covenanter scaffold is one thing. A living McCulloch who can still rebuild in Ireland is another. So he does the thing that later critics never quite forgive and later sympathizers completely understand. He leaves. Not by strolling away from the fight, but by riding hard for the nearest sound where galleys still answer his call. From Largy's little bay or another sheltered spot, he and a small knot of officers and bodyguards board a boat for Gear. Behind him, on the moss and the roads, the rest of his army is left to fend for itself. Leslie's view from the field. By midday, Sir David Leslie sat his horse on slightly higher, firmer ground and looked out over what had been McCulloch's last mainland army. They were everywhere. Dead in ones and twos in the bog. Fleeing in small groups toward the south. Throwing down weapons to raise hands or wave bits of cloth in surrender. He sent out orders. No wild chase into the deepest moss, he'd not lose horse flesh to swamp-sucking ground. Gather prisoners. Separate out any who seemed like gentlemen or known officers. Mark the bodies of those with Irish features or known reputations. The ministers would want to know who had died under judgment and who still needed it. The report he would later send up the chain would be simple. We fell in with the rebels near Rhunahaorine. Our horse charged and broke them. About 80 were killed in the first onset and pursuit, many of the rest have fled toward the south. We will not cease until this peninsula is cleared of them. He glanced toward the north, where the smoke of Largy Castle would soon rise if he fulfilled the next part of Argyle's wish, punishment for those local lords who had harboured McAllister. Largy in flames that same afternoon or soon after, Largy Castle, the house that had sheltered McAllister the night before, was put to the torch. Leslie's men went through it quickly, taking anything of immediate value, driving out livestock and servants, then piling brush and furniture and setting it alight. The smoke rose dark and oily, visible for miles along the Kintyre coast, a column of warning for every laird and tacksman who had thrown in with the Royalists. Up the peninsula, men in glens and on headlands saw it and knew. It's over. There will be no more armies between us and Argyle. Flight to Dunaverty for the survivors of Rhunahaorine was. The world had narrowed to fear and road dust. They moved south in broken groups. McDougalls from the north, gathering what kin they could. McDonalds of Largy and Sander, counting who was missing and who could still carry a sword. Stray Irish veterans, grim and silent, marching because there was nowhere else to go. Behind them, word spread that McAllister had gone over the sea. The man whose name had been rallying cry and terror both was now absent, a rumour heading for Islay. So the men he left behind did what men have always done in that corner of Kintyre when the land turns against them. They went to the rock. Dunaverty Castle, perched on its jagged promontory at the far tip of the peninsula, had been a stronghold since the days of early Dalriata. It looked like a place you could make a last stand, with cliffs on three sides and a single narrow approach. They poured into it McDonalds, McDougalls, Kintyre tacksmen, Irish stragglers bringing what food they could, what powder, what hope. They told themselves that a fortress so strong, with so much history in its stones, might wring good terms from even a hard man like Leslie. Behind them, on the wet, trampled ground of Rhunahaorine was, crows already circled, and the mud slowly eased itself back over prints and blood. The battle was over, the war in Kintyre was not, but its end was now inevitable. From that morning's charge and rout came a straight line of cause and effect. The burning of Largy. The crowding of Dunaverty with desperate men. The siege, the thirst, the surrender. And then the gallows and blood-slick rock that would make Dunaverty a curse in Gaelic mouths for generations. Rhunahaorine itself would be remembered less for the exact blows struck there, and more for the simple, brutal fact that on one damp May morning, a few dozen horsemen on boggy ground shattered the last organized hope of Royalist Kintyre.